Nothing about that Tuesday felt like the kind of day that ends with your own daughter in handcuffs on your front porch. I want to say that up front, because everything that follows will sound impossible, and I need you to understand that I lived it one ordinary hour at a time. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 66 years old. I spent 34 years running my own HVAC business here in Tulsa before I sold it and retired, and until this past spring, I would have told you my biggest problem in life was my knees. I've got a house on Terwilliger Boulevard I paid off 11 years ago, a paid-off Ford F-250, and a daughter named Casey who I thought, right up until the moment I didn't, was the best thing I ever helped put into this world. Hit subscribe if you're new here, and drop a comment letting me know what city you're listening from, because this story is going to take a while, and I want the company. My wife Diane passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to the funeral. I don't tell you that for sympathy. I tell you because it matters to what comes next. When Diane died, it was Casey who moved back to Tulsa from Dallas to be near me. Casey, 34, divorced, no kids, worked remote, doing something with insurance, claims I never fully understood, no matter how many times she explained it. She rented a duplex 12 minutes from my house and came by twice a week like clockwork. Sunday dinner, and usually a Wednesday check-in. She'd bring groceries some weeks, tell me I was buying too much salt, roll her eyes at my recliner, which admittedly has seen better decades. I thought I was lucky. I told people I was lucky. I told my brother Ray that exact word, lucky, at Easter, not knowing that in 5 months I'd be sitting in my own kitchen reading a screen that would take that word and grind it into something unrecognizable. It started, if I trace it back honestly, with the dizzy spells. Small ones at first. I'd stand up from the recliner too fast, and the room would tilt, just for a second, and I'd put a hand on the wall and wait it out. I mentioned it to Casey on a Wednesday in April, casual, the way you mention your knee or your blood pressure, just small talk between a father and daughter. She got quiet for a second, and then she said, "Dad, that's not nothing at your age. You should get that looked at." I told her I'd make an appointment. I didn't, not right away, the way men my age don't. And the following Wednesday she showed up with a bag from the pharmacy. Little brown bottle, tincture dropper, minimal label, the kind of packaging you'd see on one of those wellness shelves at the health food store on Sheridan. She said, "I talked to my friend Marnie. She does holistic nutrition coaching. She said, this is a circulation and vertigo support tincture, all plant-based. She swears by it for her own mother." I looked at that bottle for a good while. I am not, understand, a man who distrusts his own daughter. I am a man who ran a business for 34 years and learned to read a label before he signs off on a job, so out of habit more than suspicion, I turned the bottle over. Ingredients listed some kind of ginger root extract, ginkgo, a few names I didn't recognize, and distilled water. Nothing that looked like it belonged in a hospital. Casey measured out the drops herself into a glass of orange juice, 12 drops, and set it in front of me at the kitchen table. "Start with 12 a day," she said. Marnie said, "Give it 2 weeks, and you'll notice the dizziness improve." I drank it because my daughter handed it to me with the same face she'd had since she was 7 years old, asking me to check under her bed for monsters, and because I loved her, and because it genuinely did not occur to me, not for 1 second, that there was anything to be afraid of in my own kitchen. The dizziness did not improve. It got worse, and it got strange, in a way plain vertigo never had. Some mornings I'd lose 10, 15 minutes entirely, standing in my own garage with a socket wrench in my hand and no memory of walking out there. I started writing things down on a legal pad by the phone, not because I suspected Casey, God, not even close, but because a man starts to worry about his own mind at 66, and worry makes you want a record. June the 3rd, forgot where I parked at the Resource on 71st. June the 9th, couldn't recall Ray's grandson's name at the cookout, had to fake it. June the 14th, stood in the shower for what Diane's old clock radio said was 22 minutes, and I don't remember more than 90 seconds of it. Casey noticed me getting worse, and she was, I have to say this honestly, wonderful about it. Sweet. Patient. She started coming by 3 times a week instead of 2. She'd sit with me and ask gentle questions. "Dad, do you remember what we talked about on Sunday?" And when I couldn't, she'd get this look on her face, this soft, worried, loving look, and she'd say, "It's okay, Dad. We'll figure this out together. Don't worry about it." I want you to sit with that phrase for a second, because I certainly have. More times than I can count since. Don't worry about it. The last Wednesday in June, she brought her cousin Denise along, introduced her as somebody who works in elder care administration, and just wanted to say hello, get a feel for how I was doing day to day. Denise was polite, asked me easy questions. What year is it? Who's the president? Can you tell me the months of the year backward? And wrote things down on a little notepad with a soft, sympathetic smile the whole time. I didn't think much of it then. A man doesn't think much of anything when his daughter is sitting beside him, holding his hand, looking worried on his behalf. It was 2 days after that visit, the last Friday in June, standing at my own kitchen sink, rinsing out that little brown dropper bottle because I'd run it dry and wanted to see if there was a refill number on it anywhere, that I noticed the bottle didn't sit right in my palm the way it had in April. Lighter somehow. And when I unscrewed the cap all the way to look for a manufacturer's stamp on the inside of the lid, something rattled loose from where it had wedged itself against the dropper mechanism. A little curl of foil, silver on one side, the kind that seals individual capsules, torn along one edge like it had been ripped rather than peeled. I set the dropper bottle down on the counter and held that scrap of foil up to the window light. And there, printed small along the torn edge in the flat clinical font that belongs to a pharmacy, not a health food shelf, I read 3 letters and a partial word before the tear cut it off. CLON. My first thought, and I promise you this is true, was that Casey herself must be on some medication she hadn't told me about, and had accidentally dropped a capsule wrapper into my tincture bottle while refilling it at her own kitchen counter. That was my first thought. I am an honest man, and I will tell you my first thought was concern for my daughter, not suspicion of her. I typed those letters into my phone, standing right there at the sink with the water still running, my hands not entirely steady, though I told myself that was just the dizziness again. Clonazepam. I read the word, and then I read what came under it, and the running water seemed to get very far away. Sedative. Anticholinergic, adjacent effects at accumulated doses in elderly patients. Common effects at chronic low exposure. Short-term memory impairment, disorientation, symptoms consistent with early-stage cognitive decline. I stood there and read that sentence, probably 6 times, the way you reread a number on an invoice that can't possibly be right until you've added it up 3 separate times, by hand. From the den, the television was playing some rerun I'd left on. Ordinary house sounds. The refrigerator humming. And in my hand, a torn scrap of foil that had been sitting inside the bottle my daughter had been measuring into my orange juice every single morning for going on 10 weeks. I did not confront anybody that night. I want to be honest with you about that too, because I think it matters. I turned off the water. I dried that scrap of foil with a paper towel like it was evidence, which I suppose by then it was, and I set it inside an empty prescription bottle of my own from the medicine cabinet, and I sat down at my kitchen table, the same one Casey had sat across from me at not 2 days before, holding my hand and telling me not to worry, and I let myself think, really think, for the first time in 10 weeks. 12 drops. Every morning. Never missed a day. Denise, Elder Care Administration, taking notes on a little pad. Don't worry about it. I thought about Casey's divorce 18 months back, and the fact that she'd mentioned once, only once, sideways, that the settlement hadn't gone the way she'd hoped, that Brad's lawyer had been sharper than hers. I thought about the fact that she'd started asking, gently, over the last month, whether I'd ever updated my will since Diane passed, whether I'd thought about what happens to the house, whether I trusted her to handle things if something ever happened to me. I had thought, at the time, that this was a daughter being responsible. Sitting at that table at 11 at night with a scrap of pharmacy foil and an old pill bottle in front of me, it did not feel like responsibility anymore. It felt like inventory. I called my nephew Marcus at 11:15. Marcus is Ray's boy, my brother's son, 31 years old, and he clerks for a federal judge over in Oklahoma City. Sharpest kid in the family by a wide margin, the kind of young man who reads a contract twice before he signs for a pizza. I hadn't called him after 10 at night in years, and he picked up on the second ring already alert. The way people get when a phone rings that late, and it's someone who never calls that late. Uncle Walt, what's wrong? I told him everything, start to finish, the dizzy spells, the legal pad, the dropper bottle, Denise, and her little notepad, the scrap of foil, the word clonazepam, all of it. In what he told me later was almost 14 straight minutes without him getting a single word in edgewise. When I finished, there was a long quiet on the line. Long enough I checked to see if the call had dropped. Then he said, in a voice that had gone very flat and very careful, "Uncle Walt, do not throw that bottle away, and do not say one word to Casey about any of this. Not one word. Do you understand me?" I told him I understood. He said, "I need you to get that bottle and that piece of foil to a lab, an independent one, not anything connected to family. And I know somebody who can rush it quiet. Can you get it to me tomorrow?" I told him I could drive it to Oklahoma City myself if I had to. He said, "Good. And Uncle Walt, one more thing. Don't fill that dropper up again in the morning. Pour it out. Don't take another drop of whatever's in that bottle. Not one more. Are we clear?" We were clear. I drove to Oklahoma City the next morning, 90 minutes up the turnpike, with that little bottle riding in the console like it might go off. Marcus met me in a Cracker Barrel parking lot off I-44, which felt almost comical given the weight of what I was handing him, but he took the bottle wrapped in a paper towel inside a sandwich bag, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "I'm going to need 4 or 5 days, maybe less if I lean on somebody. Go home. Act completely normal. If Casey calls, if she comes by, you are exactly the same confused, sweet, grateful father you've been for the last 2 months. Can you do that?" I told him I built a business for 34 years, managing difficult customers, with a smile on my face. I could manage my own daughter for 5 days. He almost smiled at that, but not quite. Those 5 days were the longest of my life, longer than the 11 months with Diane, because, at least with Diane, I knew exactly what enemy I was fighting. Casey came by Wednesday like always, sat across from me, poured out my 12 drops from a fresh bottle she'd brought, and I drank it. May God forgive me, because pouring it out where she could see me would have ended the only advantage I had. She asked me what day it was, and I told her the wrong day on purpose. Watched something flicker behind her eyes that I would have called love 2 weeks earlier, and now could not unsee for exactly what it was. Satisfaction. She squeezed my hand and said, "That's okay, Dad. We're going to take good care of you." And I sat there and smiled at my own daughter, and felt something in my chest go cold and permanent, the way concrete sets. Marcus called on a Monday morning, 9 days after the Cracker Barrel parking lot, and his voice had none of the careful gentleness he'd been using on the phone all that week. "Uncle Walt, sit down." I told him I was sitting. The lab confirmed clonazepam in that tincture, concentrated well past anything you'd find in an actual prescription dose, present in a supplement bottle that legally should have contained nothing but plant extract and water. He said the toxicologist's exact words, and I'm going to give them to you the way he gave them to me, was, quote, "consistent with deliberate, sustained administration designed to produce cognitive impairment, not medical treatment," end quote. He let that sit for a second on the line. Then he said, "Uncle Walt, I also pulled something else, because once I had the lab report, I had enough cause to ask a favor from a friend at the Tulsa County Clerk's office. Somebody filed a request for a certified valuation of your house and your investment accounts back in May. It didn't come from a bank. It came from a law office downtown, a man named Gerald Voss, who I looked into, and Uncle Walt. This man has a reputation. 3 prior cases flagged by Oklahoma's Office of the Attorney General for aggressive elder guardianship filings. 2 of them involving daughters or nephews of aging parents, with paid-off homes and no other family close by to object. I asked him straight out, "Is my daughter working with this man?" And Marcus said, quietly, "The paperwork's not filed yet. It's drafted, sitting ready, waiting on a triggering event, a diagnosed decline, a hospitalization, something a judge could point to." He said, "Uncle Walt, that Denise woman who came by with the notepad, she's not family. She's not elder care administration either. I ran her. She's a paralegal who works out of Voss's office. That was never your daughter's cousin sitting at your table. That was the other side building their file. I want to tell you what a man feels sitting in his own recliner, the same recliner Casey used to roll her eyes at, hearing that his daughter hired a woman to sit at his kitchen table and pretend to be family while she documented his mind coming apart on purpose. It is not rage, not at first. Rage comes later, and it comes hot. But that first feeling is something closer to the floor, giving way beneath a house you built with your own hands. Slow and silent and total. I asked Marcus, why? Why would she do this to me? And he said, "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." And Uncle Walt, I need you to trust me completely for the next 2 weeks and do exactly what I tell you, because we only get one chance to do this the right way. The way that ends with her in a courtroom, and not just in an argument, you'll both regret. What Marcus built over those 2 weeks, working nights after his clerkship hours, with a patience I will be grateful for as long as I live, was this. First, he got me in front of an independent neuropsychologist in Tulsa, a woman named Dr. Alice Redfern, who'd testified in guardianship disputes before and had no connection to anyone in our family, and I sat through 2.5 hours of testing while pretending, God help me, that I hadn't already poured out that morning's dropper into the bathroom sink for the 9th straight day. When it was over, Dr. Redfern told Marcus, in front of me, that my cognitive function was, quote, entirely unremarkable for a man of 66, no measurable impairment whatsoever, end quote, and that whatever anyone claimed to have observed in the preceding months had no medical basis. Second, Marcus filed that evaluation, sealed and dated, with the Tulsa County Courthouse, establishing my competency on the record before anybody else could file a single word against me. Third, he took the toxicology report, the pharmacy foil, and Denise's employment records straight to the Tulsa Police Department's Elder Abuse Unit, where a detective named Sam Willoughby, a patient, thorough man who I came to respect a great deal, opened a formal criminal file. Fourth, and this is the part Marcus almost didn't tell me, worried it would break something in me before we were ready. He pulled Casey's bank records through a subpoena tied to the criminal filing and found that she had been meeting with Gerald Voss since the 2nd week of May, 3 days before she ever brought me that first bottle, and that Voss's office had wired her firm's paralegal, that same Denise, 40 hours of billed consulting time over 10 weeks. This had never been a daughter panicking about a settlement she lost. This had been planned before she ever sat down across from me holding my hand. We moved on a Tuesday in the middle of August. I called Casey that morning and told her, in the same soft, slightly confused voice I'd been practicing for 6 weeks now, that my attorney, a good man named Phil Castellano, who'd handled Diane's estate, had flagged something about the house paperwork and wanted the family together to go over it before the end of summer. Casey agreed before I finished the sentence, told me she'd come by at 2, sounded, if anything, relieved, like a woman who thought the hard part was almost over. I dressed in my good khakis and the blue button-down Diane always liked, and I sat in my own living room at 1:55 waiting, the way you wait for a storm you can already smell coming. Casey arrived exactly on time, let herself in with her key the way she'd done for 4 years, and sat down across from me at the same dining table, all warmth, all softness, asking if I wanted coffee. In a minute, I told her. I looked at my daughter, 34 years old, the same little girl who used to fall asleep against my shoulder at Diane's church potlucks, and I said, Casey, before Phil gets here, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think before you answer. Her face didn't change, not yet. What is it, Dad? I said. Why did you bring Denise to my house in June? Something flickered, quick, controlled, but I'd learned to see it by then. She works with my friend Marnie, Dad. I told you that. I said, no, Casey, she doesn't. She's a paralegal for a man named Gerald Voss, and I know exactly what he does for a living. And I know exactly what's been in that little brown bottle you've been pouring into my orange juice every single morning since April. The doorbell rang. I watched every ounce of color leave my daughter's face as Marcus walked through my own front door, carrying a leather folder, followed a step behind by Detective Willoughby, and I understood, watching her, that, whatever was about to happen to her, some part of me had already grieved for months. Before it arrived, Marcus set 3 documents on the table, one at a time, the way you set down cards you know are unbeatable. The first, he said, is an independent toxicology report, confirming that the tincture given daily to my uncle since April contained clonazepam at a concentration consistent, and I'm quoting the toxicologist directly, with sustained, deliberate cognitive impairment. Casey's hands were flat on the table, not moving. The second is a certified neuropsychological evaluation dated 3 weeks ago, establishing my uncle's full cognitive competency, which means any guardianship petition built on a claim of his decline collapses the moment it's filed. The third is a billing record from Gerald Voss's law office showing 40 hours of paralegal consulting paid for by you, Casey Higgins, beginning in the 2nd week of May. 11 days before you ever brought my uncle that first bottle. He looked up from the papers. So, to be very clear about what happened here, you and Mr. Voss built a plan to poison a healthy 66-year-old man slowly enough that it would look like natural decline, so that a judge would hand you control of his house and his savings, and you hired somebody to sit at his table and document it while calling herself family. Casey said, very quietly, Dad, I can explain. And I said, then explain. Because I have wanted nothing more than an explanation for 11 days. What came out of my daughter over the next few minutes was not really an explanation. It was a confession dressed up as one. The divorce settlement had gone worse than she'd told me, badly enough that she owed nearly $90,000 in legal fees and a business loan. Brad had talked her into co-signing before he left her, holding it alone. Voss had approached her, not the other way around, at a networking event for divorced professionals, told her he specialized in, quote, helping families navigate aging parents' assets before things got complicated, end quote, and made the whole thing sound clinical, almost kind, like he was helping her plan ahead rather than commit a crime. She said, Dad, he told me you'd probably need assisted living in a few years anyway, that this way you'd never even know, that it would just look like getting old. I asked her, did you ever, one single time, think about what the drops were actually doing to me while you sat there holding my hand telling me not to worry? She didn't answer that one. She just cried, the real kind, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to perform. Detective Willoughby read her the charges standing right there in my dining room. Felony administration of a controlled substance to a vulnerable adult, financial exploitation of an elderly person, criminal conspiracy, the handcuffs going on quiet and almost gentle, the way experienced officers do it when they've seen this particular kind of ruin plenty of times before. Casey looked at me once before they walked her out, and she said, Dad, I'm sorry. I never wanted to actually hurt you, and I said the only thing I had left in me, which was, you don't get to decide that, Casey. Your body decided that every morning for 10 weeks. Gerald Voss was arrested that same week, referred to the Oklahoma Bar Association for disbarment proceedings that are still ongoing as I record this. Denise, whose last name I still have trouble saying out loud, took a plea agreement in exchange for testifying against both of them. The case went in front of a judge this past spring, and I sat in that Tulsa County courtroom in the same blue button-down, and I listened to the judge describe what had happened to me in language so plain it nearly finished the job the tincture started. This was not a family disagreement, she said. This was the attempted destruction of a man's mind for the sake of an inheritance he was still very much alive to spend. Casey received 3.5 years. I did not feel like celebrating when they let her out, and if anybody tells you they'd feel triumph watching their own child sentenced, I'd be careful trusting the rest of what they tell you. What I felt instead, sitting there in that hard wooden pew of a courtroom bench, was something more like the quiet. After a long fever finally breaks, the specific, hard-won relief of a man who spent 10 weeks slowly losing his own mind and has finally, completely, gotten it back. Marcus still comes by every Sunday now, sits in the recliner Casey used to make fun of, and doesn't say a word about it needing to be replaced. My brother Ray comes some weekends too, and we sit on the back porch and don't talk about any of it most of the time, which is its own kind of mercy. I go to Dr. Redfern for a checkup every 6 months now, just to have it on record, just to know for certain, every single time, that my mind is entirely, completely mine. If you've made it this far, I'd like to know where you're listening from tonight. And if this story found you the way it needed to find somebody, pass it along to whoever needs to hear it. I'll be back with another one soon.